What's up, everyone? I'm James Baney, and I am here with Kyle Larson, and we are getting ready to do a spoiler-filled book discussion on A Crash of Fate. Stick around. All right, Kyle, we're back. We're doing another book. This is another one of the books that had this big, I don't know, all of a sudden we got hit with all these books, right? This came out the same day as Myths and Fables, and we're all scrambling. I think only one time in the past has that ever happened, that two books came out on the same time.
Wow, I didn't even know that there was a historical precedent for that, because I didn't even realize that, and that's kind of my job at Star Wars Newsnet, is to know about when the books are coming out, and I don't think I realized it until a few days before. But what a great pair of books to get on the same day for fans.
Yeah, I agree. Just to get started, Crash of Fate is what we're going to be talking about today. The book was released, like we said, August 6th, same as Myths and Fables. It was written by Zoraida Córdova and read by Brittany Presley. It was published by Disney Lucasfilm Press and recorded by Random House Audio. And then the timeline for this book actually takes place months, as they say, months after The Last Jedi. So it definitely takes place before The Rise of Skywalker, but they say specifically months after The Last Jedi. Do you want to talk scores real quick? Just to get things started, right away, I was very pleasantly surprised by this book. Just to start. And I actually ended up giving this book an 8 out of 10.
Nice.
Very high on my list. What about you? What did you think? Because I know you have a little bit of backstory with this, having read it a lot earlier than I did, or most people did.
Yeah, I received a copy unexpectedly. I'm lucky enough, and thank you, Disney Lucasfilm Publishing, if you're watching, for the advanced copies. I always appreciate them. But I received an advanced copy, and I'd been looking forward to this book mostly because I thought the cover was just fascinating, with the two climbing a black spire, and there's a TIE fighter kind of circling underneath. And as soon as I opened the book, I was just taken away. I was transported immediately, and I gave it a 9 out of 10 because
9 out of 10, okay.
9 out of 10, which a little bit higher than yours, but that's close to a perfect score, or as perfect a score a book can get in my criterion for reviewing a book. And I just thought it was a wonderful story. I was immediately transported to a galaxy far, far away. I don't mean to sound cliched or anything, but as soon as I read that first chapter, I was like, I'm all in. I want to know what happens to these people, to these two characters, Jules and Izzy. Yeah.
I this, Kyle, I talked to you privately before we started reading these books. I was like, man, I'm not looking forward to this one. Mm-hmm. The names threw me big time. I tweeted about that when they were first announced. Jules and Izzy do not feel like Star Wars names to me at all. Now, granted, we looked a little bit further into it. They are shorter. They're shortened names of longer names. When you hear their full names, you go, okay, that sounds kind of Star Wars-y to me, but it almost felt like the author wanted to name them Jules and Izzy. And then they were like, let's give them more real, longer, fuller names to make them actually feel a little bit more not so much teen novel, which is the vibe that I was totally getting from this. And in a weird way, it totally is that. It's totally like a romance novel. Almost like Romeo and Juliet, sort of. In this weird way, because these characters start off really young and they have a crush maybe on the other person, but then they don't see each other for, you got to think a decade or more. I don't know that they ever really state their ages at the beginning, but I know later in the book they say that Izzy is 18. So,
yeah,
and I think they even say that Jules is younger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there's about a 1 year gap in between their ages, and there's a 13-year gap from when we meet them as children in the first chapter to when we rejoin them in or not the first chapter, in the prologue to when the story actually gets going. There's about a 13-year gap. So,
yeah, they go this big long time. So I'm sitting there thinking like, man, I'm sucked into this story. I totally believe that they're in love, and I believe, like, I get why Jules likes Izzy, and I get why Izzy likes Jules. Like, it actually makes sense, but it's weird at the same time because I'm like, this isn't Titanic. Like, you guys basically just met. I know you knew each other when you were kids, but like, there's so much to this that's like infatuation versus like real love. But for some reason, and it's the writing, and I got to give it to the author on this. It's totally the writing. From the get-go, I'm just completely bought into these characters because I believe and I can follow and I can feel every step of the way that this is the next logical step. And I can't wait to hear it from the other person's point of view because they go back and forth, which I actually normally hate in books. I hate when they start skipping timelines back and forth and different points of view and stuff. That always drives me nuts. I just want to hear it from one perspective, but this does it exceptionally well, like as best as it can get.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, Zoraida Córdova, like, her writing is so elegant and so beautiful. That prologue did everything for me. That completely brought me back to my childhood. I grew up in, rural Montana. There weren't a lot of people in my neighborhood. So like the few friends that I did have, not even in like a romantic way, but like I just remember the close bonds I had with other children that I would play with in the neighborhood. And I can't imagine if I woke up one day and I was like in the back of my parents' car and they're like, yeah, we're moving to another town. Sorry about that. And in just again, we're talking spoilers here, but the desperation that you get from Izzy as soon as she's like, I didn't get to say goodbye to him. It's just like, oh man, it like hit me as soon as I started reading. And I was like, I want everything good to happen to these characters and I want to read about it. And that's I think that's why I loved the book so much. But that I think is a credit to her writing because it's not like she took a cheap gut punch and was like, oh, I'm going to make you sad and then I'm going to redeem you and lift you up. She gave us a worthy narrative. She displayed that Izzy has gone through some trauma in her life and that Jules has kind of been this, rock for his family who've gone through some trauma in their life. And now they're going to kind of come together and find strength in one another in this childhood bond, this bond of innocence that they found at such a young age. And that was, to me, like one of the most touching parts of the story. And what carried really, because if you think about the plot, there isn't a lot that happened in the course of the day that we, were involved with them. But the range of emotions and the healing that these two bring to one another is so remarkable and believable too, which is really, really hard to pull off. So big props to Zoraida Córdova for this.
I feel like it's just going to be said over and over and over again about how much you actually care about the characters for whatever reason. I noticed you pointed out, you said like right at the beginning, they get you hooked and stuff. Like to me, that prologue ends with them saying that she made a promise that she was going to come back and find him or whatever. And then it was like, and that was the first promise I ever broke. And it's like, that's how it ends, and then it goes into chapter 1. And you're like, oh my gosh. So it's like, you already know just from the prologue, like before chapter 1 starts, you already know that these people care for each other, but yet for whatever reason, they can't find the way to make themselves get back to each other.
Yeah.
Before chapter 1 even starts, because that prologue sets it up so well. And Yeah, like I said before, the flipping back and forth thing, it actually, like I said, it normally messes with me. I'm like, who's talking? Like, am I with these characters, or am I with this other rebel group over here? And it sometimes it can be like very confusing. And this book was, while granted it was only one word, but like every chapter started with like Jules, right? And you're like, okay, cool. I'm in the Jules section now. And you hear exactly what he is thinking, and you do totally have the vibe. It's weird too, because like, I know there have been a lot of stories that have been written from the perspective of a male character. And then there's been stories written their perspective from the female character, like Rebel Rising or something, right? Or Princess of Alderaan, right? They're read from a female point of view, which often means that the writer or the narrator is a female voice, or a male voice. And in this case, it was a female all the way through, but the writing itself was like, I feel like this is how a boy views the situation.
Yes.
The way he was describing this beautiful girl in front of her. And then when they switch to the girl and she's describing the person in front of her, it's very like, I don't know, like what a female finds attractive about a man, but not like in a physical way. Sometimes it's like, oh, he's very blank or very blank, and they describe it in a perfect way. I'm doing a terrible job. But like even the writing itself gave me the feeling that like I knew what chapter I was in because it was written and it was being told from a female perspective. And then again, it switches over and it's like the male perspective. And that all adds to the whole thing of like every single chapter. It's like, so we were walking down the street and I looked over at him and I was like, man, he's really awesome for this reason, And I'm I get it. I totally get it. I know why that character would want to be with the other one. And the whole vibe of everything that was going on, it does take you back to a day when you had nothing to do after school but to go and hang out with your friends. And you were just kind of like feeling out all the dramatic relationships. Like, oh, I think Stephanie has a crush on Matt, but I think Matt really likes, Melinda, or whatever. Like, I could remember being like, oh, like if I was just walking through the streets and hanging out with these characters, this is exactly, I don't know. All of this to say, like, I just really connected with the writing of the story and how it was all perspective. About the bigger picture though, I think it was interesting. You said it all takes place in one day, and I got the vibe that it was a little longer, like 2 days maybe. Cause I think there was like I wish I would have spent yesterday with.
Yeah, I thought that I think the prologue takes the timeline a little further, but I thought the meat of the plot kind of took place in one day. That was my impression from the book.
Yeah, I'm not considering the prologue. I'm saying,
okay.
I think there is specifically a time where like they get into an argument and then she like leaves and then they like don't spend the night together. And then he says something like, I wish I would have spent yesterday with her, but I didn't.
Oh, maybe a better way I should have worded that was 24 hours. But
possibly.
Yeah. I mean, I thought it, whether it's a day or not, I thought it's really, really like, it's almost like we're reading it in real time as it happens from her arrival on Batuu, her betrayal and then her arrival on Batuu to kind of, to do this job that she doesn't really know what it's about, but eventually we kind of find out it is tied to the resistance, even though there is still some ambiguity there. But I thought that was another credit to Zoraida Córdova's writing is that, she pulled off this kind of real-time story and you feel like you've spent a lot more time with these characters than you actually have. And you feel like you know them very, very well. And maybe that's kind of like the subtle brilliance about it is that, she was able to get us to invest in this story that, ultimately the book is also pretty short as well, but the economy of her writing got us to really invest in these characters and believe in them. So that I thought that was very interesting too.
I love that you said the real time thing, because the book is only like, as an audiobook, it's only like 7 or 8 hours or something like that. So it's almost like, you know, you got to do things throughout the day. Like, you know, you got to go to work or whatever. But I felt like it was really easy for me to just like jump in every once in a while and catch a little bit more of the story. And basically you get through the book in about a 24-hour period, 24, 48 hours, something like that. So it really does feel like when you jump in, you're like, okay, so where are they next? Oh, you know, they were just at the store. Now they're down the street at the cantina. And it's been about an hour since I was listening to the last chapter.
Yeah, totally.
You know, so it's like they probably just walked there. And man, that is really true. You feel like you're right there. Can we talk a little bit about the whole fact that it takes place in Batu?
Yes, I think we should.
Galaxy's Edge. I got my Galaxy's Edge shirt on right now.
I do too.
I'm getting excited to go myself. Yeah. I'm getting excited to go myself coming up here at the end of the month. But no, I could see somebody being like, this book is just an ad for the theme park. And I totally get that. I understand. In fact, I agree. I think it is. But I think it's so well done that it didn't feel like an ad for the park. Like, oh, of course they're going to talk about the drinks, you know?
Yes.
Of course they're going to talk about this thing, right?
Like Rotos.
It actually felt to me like, okay, I'm getting ready to go on vacation to Montana. What is there to do in Montana? I'm going to read this brochure. And it was like the most detailed, best plot-driven brochure you've ever read. And I'm like, cool. So it's like, I could just read this novel about Montana, and I totally am excited to go. I want to be there. I want to experience what these characters experienced. It's almost like the best way to kind of write an advertisement or get people excited to go to the park themselves, because they cover basically everything that's at the park.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm pumped now after reading this.
I think that is a fantastic point that you make. Was, you know, anybody who, like, if you're going on vacation somewhere, you read a book that is maybe written by an author who's from there, who wrote it about that place. And I thought that was, you know, I'm sure that some authors would probably be like, oh, you know, do I feel like I'm writing a commercial? But like, again, Zoraida Córdova, she just ran with it and she did it brilliantly. I thought that the mentions and like kind of the name drops, because I'm also, you know, reading, I can't talk about it now because it's not out yet, but I'm reading Black Spire by Delilah Dawson. And, but also the Galaxy's Edge comic as well, that's coming out by Ethan Sachs. And, you know, all this stuff, you see it recurring, but she did it so well, and it fits into the story. And it, you know, I told you the other day when we were talking, you know, I hadn't been planning on going to Galaxy's Edge for a couple of years, just because I'm not a huge fan of, like, you know, waiting in line and going into crowds and stuff. But after reading this book, I was totally floored. I'm like looking into flights and time off from work to maybe potentially go in like November or something like that because of this. So, and like I said, you know, you guys did your job, Lucasfilm. You got me to go. So it's, it fits in really well. And I don't think I understand, like, it's very easy to, you know, look at this in like a pessimistic way and think like it's a commercial, but it's so much more than that. The story is so good. And I really think that if people are avoiding this because they're afraid of that, really, like, you're not going to notice this. If this hadn't even been a Star Wars book, I would have loved it equally. You know, it just the fact that it was a Star Wars book, it was kind of like the cherry on top for me, was like a bonus to me. So
yeah, I feel the exact same way, in the sense of like, man, don't like, we'll talk a little bit here, just that's going to be our next point of like, how does this all fit in? Like, what's the point of this book? Where does it fit into the canon? What possibilities could we see coming out of this book? But I think for me, like one of the takeaways, if you're considering reading this book, or you probably already have because it's a spoiler review, but like if you're going to recommend it to somebody, I think the biggest point is like, don't read it because it's a Star Wars book. Read it because it's a good book. Like just
Absolutely.
You will like these characters. You will have fun with it. And then at the end of the day, you will be like, man, that was a lot of fun, and it was refreshing, and it was just kind of, a good read. And wow, it's actually really kind of connected in a weird way to these other stories that I love. You know what I mean? I'm excited to go to Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. This book that doesn't have anything to do with Star Wars, but it does happen to take place in Galaxy's Edge on Batuu, in the Black Spire outpost, so it's like all of this stuff is just really neat the way it connects. But I do want to talk a little bit about that bigger picture because
let's go.
That ending, right? The end of that book is all right, so what's
something's
going
down. Yeah.
I know when I finished the book, the first thing I did was I called you and I was like, so what does this mean? Let's just talk about it because I'm excited. I've given it a little bit more thought. It ends with them going back to the place, or they've been there for a little while or whatever, and they just kind of like are getting ready to continue living their lives, and then all of a sudden they describe it as like lasers breaking the sky. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they say that one of the docking bays like opens up and there's ships flying out. And I looked it up, and that particular docking bay is like a First Order recruiting station and stuff. So it's like the First Order is taking on, they say the Resistance is coming out of hiding, and all this stuff is like, oh, this is interesting. But they paint the scape that like everybody in the outpost scatters and is frantic because all of a sudden there's this giant battle above them. And at first I was like, okay, so as much as I wouldn't think so, I think this is seemingly meaning that we're going to see Batuu in episode 9 because the big battle happens above the planet. I did think a little bit later, though, this might actually connect into specifically the Rise of Resistance.
That's kind of what I thought too.
Oh, really? Okay. Because Rise of Resistance specifically is like, hey, we're on Batuu and nothing's wrong. And then you get on a ship, and then all of a sudden you're caught in the middle of a battle between the First Order and the Resistance, which doesn't necessarily mean it's the battle of Rise of Skywalker, but it does mean that there is a significant like falling out between these two regimes over top of the city. And it's all part of that, but not maybe the biggest battle. So I want you to take the floor because I've been talking too much about this. Where's it all going? How does this connect? Are we going to see Izzy and Jules in episode 9?
I hope so, but after we spoke too, I started thinking more because I've been reviewing the Galaxy's Edge comic, which it's not complete yet, but I think there's one issue left. The First Order is very much present, and I think that the Galaxy's Edge comic takes place either shortly before or simultaneously as Crash of Fate. Black Spire by Delilah Dawson, spoiler alert everyone, actually takes place before Crash of Fate. So we're hearing about the Resistance kind of setting up in that novel, setting up a base on Batuu, and then Crash of Fate, it's clear that it's well established, but I think that we're more likely to see this battle play out in the Galaxy's Edge comic and the ride, like you mentioned. But I do think there's a slight possibility this could end up in the Rise of Skywalker, because what better commercial would that be for? And I don't mean commercial like in the capitalist like negative sense. I'm just saying like a better advertisement to like draw people to the park, like, oh, you can be a part of this final battle in the epic Skywalker saga. But I ultimately think it's going to be a more contained battle, and maybe we'll be hearing about that battle in the Rise of Skywalker. Maybe that'll be like the battle in the opening crawl, as we saw Rogue One is an entire movie that is just barely mentioned in the crawl. It could be like, the opening crawl of Rise of Skywalker is like after the Battle of Batuu or something like that. That's, let's just say the Resistance has been hiding deep within The Last Jedi, and the Battle of Batuu is kind of like what brings them out, and they're like, okay, it's time to fight. And then that's kind of what the catalyst for that story is. So
I mean, knows? Like I said, they do say in that, they said it looks like the Resistance are finally coming out of hiding.
Totally. That's a key thing to me.
That's interesting. Not to mention too, like I think we tend to think of it like, oh, well, of course it's Star Wars land. Of course they're going to put Rey and Chewbacca there. But at the same time, like, no, they legitimately are trying to keep this as canon as they can.
Yeah.
And which means that at this period of time that takes place a few months, after The Last Jedi, but before the Rise of Skywalker, Rey and Chewbacca and the Millennium Falcon are there.
Yeah, totally. Pirates Price establishes that. Yeah.
Yes. So it's like, okay, so there's a pretty good chance that Batuu and the Battle of Batuu, as you want to say it here, like they might actually do something that ties in with the beginning or like an opening crawl or maybe the first scene or something. Or maybe even like a mention. And, I would really love to see, cause we didn't get really any visual, images of these characters.
I know. That's the only thing I was bummed about with this book, is I wish we would have had some visual images.
Yeah, which has happened before in the past, like obviously like Lost Stars. We get descriptions of the characters, but the visuals didn't show up until later, like in the card game. They did like a manga as well. So I'm hoping that they do a little bit more with this. But it would be interesting if they did stick these characters in the background or whatever, and then it ends up in like the Art of Rise of Skywalker or the visual dictionary for it or something. They're just like there and they're like holding guns or something. And you're like, oh my gosh, man, this is crazy. Cause they're so young. Like at this point you're thinking they're below 20. So they're like Rey's age-ish, actually, I don't know. I think Rey's kind of older now that I'm thinking about it.
She's a little bit older.
Luke and Leia in A New Hope age, ish.
Yeah.
It's perfect. Where's it all going? It potentially is going straight into episode 9. That's like a hope so. I think like my real brain says they're not going to do that, but I don't know. I mean, it's just always hoping because I was so drawn to these characters.
I think we will get it, whether or not it's episode 9 or a comic or them showing up in Galaxy's Edge, the park. I definitely think we're going to get a follow-up, because it seemed like they left. I'm sure the story group, as they read this book, and other people who, the powers that be, not that the story group are like the Holy Grail, but like the powers that be, as they read this, they're probably like, we need to do more with these two, because it sets it up so beautifully. It's just the same spirit of like when Luke left Tatooine to go, fight the Empire. It's very in the same vein for me. So at least I hope so. The same as you. Well, even if it's not Rise of Skywalker, I would just love to see more of these characters.
All right. Well, let me ask you, what was your favorite part of this book, or favorite thing about this book? The elevator, why you should read it kind of thing.
Well, I'm gonna say that my favorite scene in this book, I really loved the scene where they finally kind of come together and they're swimming in the cavern. Just the descriptions of that were so beautiful. And I thought that it was really cool that it was
Final Fantasy X.
Final Fantasy X, yes. Which I, now I know that that's kind of where the visuals were borrowed from, or maybe they're not. Hopefully they're Zoraida Córdova. If you're watching this, don't take that personally. But I thought that it was really kind of a moment of them of being disarmed and them kind of letting their vulnerabilities down. And we kind of know what happens. Her, shitty ex-boyfriend shows up, but it's a moment where they both let down their vulnerabilities and they kind of return to this innocence and this love and this bond, whether that's romantic or friendship or familial. I just thought it was a really, really cool moment. So, how about you?
I agree. I think my favorite moment has got to be there's a specific thing where I feel like at the very end of the book, not the very, very end, but like the last battle thing, there's like a specific moment where they're pulling out all the stops, and there's the what do they call it? The build up and then the payoff or whatever. Like you set up and then you pay off later. Like there's a scene at the end of the book where the freaking bird Lucky like swoops in, and I'm like, the bird had relevance in this book.
Yeah,
you know,
totally.
Like it wasn't just like this time where they're like, hey, look, there's a bird and it's cool and blah 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 blah, and it just like felt like a throwaway almost at the time, but like that bird becomes like a Harry Potter owl or
yes,
or a phoenix or something that like almost like when it shows up, you're like, oh my gosh, this is kind of a big deal. It has a personality and it's one of the characters, and of course it would be here to help win the day, you know, and stuff. And I don't know. There was literally one point where I'm sitting there and I'm just like, even the bird had a payoff.
Yeah,
had like an arc almost.
No, it's
and so it was really winning me over at the end of the book. So we talked a little bit about our scores. Our ranking for me, A Crash of Fate was an 8. It's right there with Bloodline and with Thrawn in my book. And for fans of you, for me personally, you have to mention Lost Stars. I think it's easily the most comparable book. I think everybody was completely blown away with Lost Stars because we're like, wait a minute, what? It's the two main characters are people we don't know, and all of their friends are people we don't know. What does it matter? And like, oh, it takes place over the story that we already know. What's the point? And it's like everybody was swept away by that book. And I think this is like a perfect example of a book that it kind of follows in that same vein of like, we know you don't know the characters. We know you've heard so much about Batu, but give it a listen and I guarantee you'll fall in love with them.
Yeah, I agree. For me, it was, Lost Stars was an immediate comparison. Not that the stories are similar. I also like to throw in the caveat that like the vein of the story is similar, but it is a very different, much more contained story than Lost Stars. But I also thought the novelization of Solo, a Star Wars story by Mur Lafferty is a really good comparison because I don't know if you've read that, but it's a bit expanded. Yeah. The story's a bit more expanded than the movie. And I feel like the reason that I love the film, but I enjoyed the novel like 100 times more than the film because I thought that her emphasis on Han and Kira's bond and the kind of escape that they were able to achieve from this awful situation made it even more triumphant for me when they both, whether you want to think that Kira going off to join Crimson Dawn is a bad thing or a good thing, but she triumphed, she won, and so did Han. And I thought that was a really cool way that Mur Lafferty, the author, told that story.
I'll actually, I'll do you one more too.
Yeah.
Most Wanted.
Oh,
did you read that? Most Wanted to me is the same deal with it being a story about Han and Kira, but it's Han and Kira together in love, so to speak, like trying to figure out how the other one feels about them. And they go on this adventure, and at the end of it, they're way more connected than they were at the beginning of the book. And you feel that all the way through it. This isn't a review for Most Wanted, but I think highly underrated book, overlooked massively by some of the other books that came out around its time.
I overlooked it big time. I honestly, I didn't, I own it, but I haven't read it. And just because I think I was reading like 3 different books at the time it came out, and it did go under my radar, but you saying that makes me want to go read it now. So thank you. Yeah. And you should read it too, YouTubers. So.
Yes. All the people watching, for this specific book, we want you to put in the comments what were your favorite moments were, because we want to talk about that stuff. What your thoughts on the book was, the score, anything that is kind of just like, let's get some conversation going. Don't even just put comments about what you're thinking, but comment on other people's comments just to get some stir up going and get some conversation going, because we're all like-minded book. This is a book discussion, and it doesn't stop at the video. It keeps going in the comments.
Yes.
Also too, I just want to throw it out there too, corrections too. Like if there's anything that we say that's crazy or wrong, like, we don't want to be the person held responsible for that. So, put the corrections in there, and then we'll comment on them and be like, oh yeah, that's right, or whatever. And we'll have that whole conversation.
Yes.
But, overall, Kyle, I think we both agree. Great book.
Yes, I agree.
Good conversation. And I'm really excited for the next episode of whatever we're doing next.
Yeah, I guess that would probably be Black Spire.
Hopefully, yeah.
One of these days. See. So, cool. Well, thanks everyone, and thanks James.
All right, we'll see you guys later.
Bye.